Hi, Josh. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, Brooke. Good to be here.
Yeah. So, as you know, we've been talking about LD 2174, which really seems to be intended to subvert local rule in a huge way and home rule. And I wanted to talk to you particularly because I've always been so impressed by the testimony and the comments that you write. And you have this background as an environmental historian, and you have this ability with words that allows you to really explain how this affects people, not just on an economic level, but on a social and cultural level. So
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, no problem. Glad to talk with you and offer whatever comments I can. So,
Yeah, so Josh has been helping us research this project since the transmission line was proposed 3 years ago now. And so, first question is, what what have you observed about transparency and the actual ability to access the public process?
yeah, that's a great question. So, as you mentioned, I've been with Preserve Rural Maine now pretty much since its inception in 2023. So, I've had a chance to observe this, and I think really the question you're asking is kind of a question about democratic legitimacy in some ways. I certainly think Maine is democratically legitimate, but I also think we've got a few challenges. And the first is really just around timing and accessibility, right? So, public hearings on bills are almost always scheduled on weekdays during standard work hours. And so that means if you're retired or if you're a lobbyist or if you're someone whose job is flexible, you can show up in Augusta and testify. But if you're working hourly or running a small business or teaching at a school, or maybe if you can't readily access like affordable childcare, it's often impossible to show up and testify. And that creates this kind of built in participation gap, which is a big problem because sometimes the people who are most affected by certain policies may be the ones who are least able to be in the room at that time, just because of that issue. I think the second thing that I would say is that bills and amendments can be hard to track in real time. So technically, most bill text gets posted online, and I think Maine does better than some states in that area. But often you have situations where big changes can happen through amendments that appear late in the process, sometimes very close to votes. And in fact, we saw this right with LD 2174, which is this bill that Preserve Rural Maine was just made aware of a couple of days ago, that, among other things, would allow the state to completely disregard local ordinances around siting these large scale solar or transmission projects. We're just made aware of this, and testimony is scheduled for tomorrow.
Right.
So we literally have just a couple of days to inform the public and get testimonies together. So if you're not watching the legislature closely or refreshing the website constantly, it's hard to know kind of what's moving forward. Um, so
Yeah.
I mean I could also talk about I could say other things. I mean the
Well,
online test, yeah, but go ahead.
well, we know that it really matters if you're in the room to be able to tell what's going on, and that's why the lobbyists are in the room.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about this general broader thing that you've referenced before, which is like there are these serious power dynamics around rural areas and resource extraction. And this
Hmm.
happens everywhere in the world. But you
Yeah.
were saying some stuff the other day that I thought was useful.
Hmm. Yeah, right. So I'm a historian, which means that whenever a question like this comes up, I always think there's nothing really new going on here. And North American history gives a pretty clear kind of idea of a pattern that's just been happening over and over again, going back to the 1600s, where we see this pattern where maybe distant corporations or distant governments come into rural or indigenous communities, extract resources, and then they leave behind ecological damage, economic inequality, and so on. There's a really interesting book that talks about this called Green Imperialism, and it's written by Richard Grove, who is a historian of science during the Age of Empires. And Grove shows this pattern of extraction from local communities goes all the way back to early European colonialism, where you have European empires treating tropical islands and colonies as these kind of like laboratories of extraction almost. So clear cutting forests for plantations, completely reorganizing landscapes for export crops, and then managing ecosystems not for the good of local communities, but for distant markets. And all this is bound up with just how capitalism develops, how it functions today. But what's really interesting, and this is one of Grove's main arguments, is that the idea of conservation itself, so the very thing that Preserve Rural Maine is trying to do, kind of emerged in response to ecological crises that were created by this imperial extraction. And so it's kind of interesting how just this has been happening, almost from the very beginning of the modern global economy. And I would say, like, if you want a contemporary example, look no further than cobalt mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Right.
Mhm.
So cobalt is essential for lithium-ion batteries, which power electric vehicles. They're a big part of the renewable energy transition. So on paper, there's climate progress, but on the ground in many parts of the Congo, this cobalt extraction causes huge problems. Toxic pollution, dangerous labor conditions, and then wealth that really flows upward through global supply chains rather than staying in local communities. So this is what happens when we ignore local context, even if our goal is decarbonization, which I'm strongly in favor of, by the way. Right? I think that's super important. But even when that's our goal, the structure of extraction still matters. Who is making the decisions?
Right.
Who's assuming the environmental risk, and who captures the value? And I think this is why like home rule matters so much in American political tradition. A lot of state constitutions, including our Constitution, affirm this right of local communities to govern themselves in matters that directly affect their welfare. So, Section 16 of our Constitution was written to make sure that communities are not completely sidelined when major decisions are made, especially through emergency legislation. So the
Right.
framers understood that those local voices are not an obstacle to good governance, but they're actually essential to it, which is why I think LD 2174 is problematic, right? It takes away that very mechanism that's there to kind of protect these communities from extraction and exploitation, and quite frankly, to protect people's own sense of connection to the places where they live.
Right. That's a perfect way to wrap up. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you,
I'll
Brooke.
see you later.
Okay.